everybody, welcome to Module 3 for Substance Abuse Evaluation and Treatment. I just wanted to start off by saying great job on the discussions this week. I thought you guys had a really active discussion and were really engaged with the material, so thanks for doing that. I just wanted to make a couple quick comments about Module 2's discussion though before we go on to Module 3's material. First, I wanted to say I noticed there was a thread of a discussion about two things, autonomy and our duty to do no harm, so some of the ethical principles. I'll start with the idea of doing no harm. That was brought up within the context of the harm reduction model, and I think that it's important to note that that can be argued both ways. So while some would argue that it's our responsibility to stick to a harm reduction model because we should do no harm, others might argue that just the opposite, that we should not use a harm reduction model because it could be doing harm. With regard to autonomy, I noticed that Jonathan is pretty staunch autonomist, pretty similar to my own views, so I'll just lay out my own bias before I make the comment that I wanted to make. And I like the comparison to prohibition. But I think it was an interesting discussion, the discussion of whether somebody has the right to harm themselves with substances with the caveat that they're not harming someone else. So is it our job in a more paternalistic manner to step in and help that person, or do they have the right to go ahead and hurt themselves if they're choosing to with substances? In Massachusetts, I know that I mentioned this to you before, but this is a particularly interesting discussion because of the issue of Section 35s, which you don't have in most states, in which clinicians are given the power to evaluate someone if they're brought in by police or others. And I want to thank Bruce for his comments about his experience with Section 35s. And as a clinician, you may find yourself evaluating these people to determine whether their liberty should be taken away because they are harming themselves with substances and they've lost the power of self-control. So particularly within Massachusetts, it's an interesting debate. And the treatment that's provided under Section 35 is really improving, which is the good news. But it's also important to note, if you're doing those types of evaluations, that in some of the treatment programs, the people are having their liberty taken away without getting as much treatment. And so I think it's important to think carefully and critically about what people are getting in return for that loss of liberty in those cases. I also just wanted to clarify a little bit about directive therapy and being more directive in therapy and what that means when people talk about that. So really what people are talking, what I meant by using that terminology is the idea that usually in therapy we don't provide advice or tell people what they should and shouldn't be doing. But others would argue that with substance abusers, these are people who have already failed in treatment, possibly, or have attempted to stop using on their own and weren't able to, and that's why they're coming to see you. And so at least early on in treatment, some people would say that you should be more directive, meaning that these people don't have the coping skills and you should really be more active in teaching them how to go about avoiding using substances. So I just wanted to clarify that. But I thought you guys did a great job in discussing how you might deal with using a harm reduction model, and also in discussing the Dutch model and how that might apply in our society or not apply in our society. I also like Allison's point about not taking away people's coping mechanisms until you've put other coping mechanisms into place. I thought that was an interesting point in a way that I hadn't thought about it before. This week, I hope your papers are going well and that they're off to a good start. I just wanted to remind you guys that we did shorten the page length for that. In the material for this week for Module 3, you'll find a discussion of traditional therapies and more innovative therapies and some of the research on those, as well as a discussion of group therapy and how that might be consistent or inconsistent with the AA-NA model, if the group therapy is led by a therapist rather than someone who is actually in recovery themselves, for example. There's also a discussion of mindfulness and how that can be applied to relapse prevention. And this is actually a relatively new technique that's being used, but I think it's an interesting one. And I put a short exercise that I'd like you to try in the lecture, just a brief introduction to mindfulness. I don't know how much exposure you guys have had to that yet. And then we'll also talk about CBT and CBT models for relapse prevention. So I hope you guys are enjoying your week, and good luck with your papers, and let me know if you have any questions.